Dr. Rick Rigsby.
My connection with the Bush family began in the 1990s. I was so privileged to be a professor at Texas A&M University. I was a former television reporter. And then I went back to school to look at the way in which the media attempts to construct reality in society. And so when we found out that President Bush, 41, was building his library at Texas A&M, several academic units were able to give representatives from those disciplines an opportunity to be part of the Bush faculty. And I was a part of the faculty from the Department of Communication that looked at the relationship between the media and the White House. And it was absolutely awesome. You know, I think that the Bush family and the Rigsby family are very similar with a few glaring exceptions. That's funny. But But think about this. I think about the Rigsby family. I think about the Bush family. But look at the values that connect us. Our faith, our love of family, our service to others. These values I learned from my mother and father. My mother is from Oklahoma, quoting Henry Ford her whole life. Ricky, if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. A third grade dropout daddy from Huntsville, Texas, quoting Michelangelo. Ricky, yes, Daddy. Ricky, I'm not going to have a problem if you aim high and miss, but I'm going to have a real issue if you aim low and hit. This third grade dropout from Huntsville meets this country woman from Oklahoma in a little town called San Francisco, California in the 1950s. They get married and start their family. I'm the oldest of the lot. My daddy gets a job as a cook, a simple cook. At the height of his career, he's bringing home $500 a month, but that does not define his impact. I wasn't thinking book back then. I'm listening to my father talk and talk and talk about these values. My goal wasn't to be a best-selling author. My goal was to figure out a way not to hear my father share these values every day. My book begins in the unlikeliest of places. Here's the launching pad. I mentioned that I met Coach Slocum. I became his life skills coach, a character coach. We have these young men for a period of time. And Coach Slocum said, I want to challenge these young men to be great men. He said, the problem is we want them to be men, and many of them have not seen men. How can they be something they've never seen? And so, Rick, I want you to challenge them to be men of character, men of integrity. I said, Coach, I know just what you are looking for. I said, I had a father that taught me some lessons that I think I can turn into the kind of curriculum that will build these young men. These lessons from a third grade dropout for 15 years served our football team. My father was a simple cook, just a simple cook, but he was a cook at this academy that trained men and women to go into the maritime business. That meant he had to travel and sail all over the world. This third grade dropout sailed the world 10 times over in a 30-year career. I have 4 degrees. My brother is a presidential appointed judge, appointed by your dad in Washington, D.C. We weren't the smartest ones in our family. The third grade dropout daddy, a country mother from Oklahoma, placing a demand upon us with lessons like these. Don't judge anyone. Is that not Barbara Bush? Son, don't judge. Son, I've been all over the world. I've seen good and bad in every shade. You won't impact somebody if you're judging them. Isn't that awesome? Oh, as a little side note that I think would be a delight to Mrs. Bush tonight, I was in third grade chasing girls every single day in class. It resulted in me staying after school on numerous occasions. One day in third grade, around 1963, my third grade teacher, Mrs. Heyman, instead of judging me and labeling me a troublemaker, said these words, Ricky, it's obvious you have a gift. And Mrs. Heyman is going to teach you when it's appropriate to exercise that gift. And then she did something that changed my life. She handed me a book, and she said, this is what I want you to do during your period after school today. Read the first chapter and you may go home. I read 3 chapters on my own that day. It changed my life. As a matter of fact, the author became one of my heroes in life, Beverly Clary. Mrs. Clary just died last year in March, right at 104 years old in Carmel. For those of you that don't know, Mrs. Clary was a librarian in Portland, Oregon, but noticed that her students weren't connecting with the characters in the book. So she wrote her first book in 1950, the one I read that day in 1963, titled simply Henry Huggins. I went on and read Henry and the Paper Route. I went on and read Henry and Beezus and Ramona. Because a 3rd grade teacher didn't judge me, but found something to pull out of me, I have a vociferous appetite for knowledge today and a rather efficacious vocabulary. After that sentence, if you don't give, you don't have a heartbeat. Reading had always been part of our lives, but Mrs. Heyman really spurred it on. She really did. And so I started not to write a book, but to prepare character lessons for young football players, because football wasn't the ultimate goal. Being great men became the ultimate goal, and that was really, really important. A few years later, in 2004, a publisher thought it was a good idea to put these lessons into print. In 2006, I published Lessons from a 3rd Grade Dropout. Here are the lessons. Not only to not judge, not only to be early, but son, be kind. He saved his greatest lesson for my worst day. A quick backstory. I married the most beautiful woman I've ever met in my life. I wasn't supposed to do that because linemen don't have a chance to do anything like that, but the blind side hadn't come out yet. And it was a fairy tale. I mean, it was an absolute fairy tale. She was a registered nurse. I was a television reporter in Northern California. We were blessed with a couple of children. And she decided to leave the nursing profession, homeschool the children, but then start volunteering in their various libraries as a volunteer aide in the library. We moved from California to Texas. She would read every night to our little boys and to me a book titled A Paradise Called Texas, about the Germans coming over, establishing communities in the hill country. I was just as moved as the kids. Our kids are great readers. I love reading. She continued to read. She found a lump along the way in her left breast. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, but she kept reading. She kept reading. As a matter of fact, even in between treatments, she was so weak, I would take her rocking chair to the campus over there at Brazos Christian School in Bryan, Texas, and place it in her library so she would read to the students with a little bit more ease. She eventually became the librarian, and she got sicker and sicker. And then in 1996, me and my 2 little boys walked up to Mommy's casket. I looked all around the funeral home. That's an interesting place to learn a lesson, but it was a life-changing lesson. Everyone is crying. My mom's crying. Everyone's crying. I'm clutching the hands of 2 little boys. And I remember looking at that 3rd grade dropout. And I said, Daddy, I've lost hope. I've lost hope. Listen to the wisdom of this man. Son, you can't lose something God gave you. You haven't lost hope. You've lost perspective. Now, son, just stand. Do y'all know that I go all over the world and I encourage people to not quit, to not give up, to keep standing, to make something out of themselves. That is the book titled Lessons from a 3rd Grade Dropout. You know what my greatest assignment is every year? I get to do a lot of things and go a lot of places, but here's my greatest assignment. Once a year, I go to that little small campus in Bryan, Texas, Brazos Christian School, and there is a group of students who have assembled in the library, and I pull out Henry Huggins, and I read to the students at the Trina L. Rigsby Memorial Library. It's the greatest assignment that I have. So I kept standing. I kept standing. You're not going to believe what happened. 2 years later, I fall in love with the finest woman I've ever met in my life again. A single school teacher from Bryan, Texas. The first thing Janet did after we got married was she adopted my little boys, fulfilling Trina's last wish that her babies not go through life without a mommy. Then we had more children. Look at our family. We're doing our part for racial reconciliation. Come on, somebody. That picture is the legacy. Listen carefully. That picture is the legacy of a third-grade dropout daddy who placed a demand upon his son on the worst day of his son's life and said, son, don't quit. You keep going. You keep standing. It makes me ask this question, what will all of our legacies look like one day? You know, it's clear what President Bush's legacy is. It's also clear what Mrs. Bush's legacy is. President Bush stood on his faith, and he stood on that solid rock called Barbara Bush. Barbara Bush stood, and just like that third-grade dropout, Barbara Bush made an impact, and she communicated to everyone around her that regardless of who you are, regardless of where you come from, regardless of what you have or don't have, you can make an impact. Even a third-grade dropout, hardly known outside of his family, is now being quoted on every continent throughout the world. I close with this, y'all. I want to encourage you to not just work on your legacy, but take a cue from Barbara Bush. You see, legacy is how you want to be remembered. But impact is why people will never forget you. You know, about a year after my first wife passed away, my dad got sick, really sick, and he would eventually pass away. And my mother asked me to preach his funeral. And I was hesitant, honored, but hesitant. Because what do you say about the greatest man that you've ever met? And it causes me to end my speech on this night with these words. Make writing your letter of recommendation easy. Make writing your eulogy impossible. God bless y'all.